All right, welcome to the latest episode of Blood Money. Today we have a very special guest, Michael Lujan. How you doing, sir?
Just fine, sir. How you doing?
Great, great. So for the viewers out there, Michael is actually a former police officer and also an investigator. And the topic we're going to talk about today is Mr. Chad Bianco, Sheriff Chad Bianco, who, as many of you know, I was recently falsely accused by Mr. Chad Bianco of trying to assassinate former President Trump. And he said a lot of really bad things about me, called me a lunatic, essentially told the world a pile of lies. Literally nothing that came out of his mouth was true. It was lie after lie. And for anybody that wants to see the evidence, go to my Twitter account, my X account, @Vem Miller. And you will see all the evidence posted there that shows, frankly, Chad Bianco to be a complete liar. Michael, I'd like you to tell you about yourself, your background, and then tell us about your investigations.
Sure. I retired from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department after 31 years. I retired at the rank of a sheriff's captain. And throughout my 31 years, I have corrections experience, patrol experience. I worked just shy of a decade in the Central Homicide Unit. And of course, I have management experience. I'm not doing any investigative work in regards to Sheriff Bianco. I have assisted in the People v. Sam Flores matter as his defense investigator on that case. So I have a little bit of a, being almost 10 years in homicide and working approximately 248 cases just in the homicide unit. I have a little experience with investigations. Also, I spent probably several years in management at the rank of lieutenant. I got promoted to lieutenant in 2012 and retired as a captain in 2020. So, at the end of 2020, so you're looking at 8 years in management. So I think I have a keen understanding on how conducting criminal investigations and also how to deal with the public in regards to describing how investigation unfolds. For example, if I may get into your conduct per se, because I don't want to jeopardize any criminal case, your defense on that. But when you look,
there is no criminal case. There's no criminal case. All I was given is a ticket. All this about the bail was untrue. Basically, I have a ticket that's $1,000 ticket at worst. I've done a lot of research on it. There's no criminal, nothing. It's basically a misdemeanor. If I pay the $1,000, then it suffices. Right. But feel free to dive into my topic.
Well, yeah, I definitely want to dive into Sheriff Bianco's conduct because this incident occurred on Saturday the 12th. He had his press conference on Sunday the 13th. So within that 24-hour span, you have the sheriff reviewed the report, reviewed the body-worn camera video, had been briefed by the supervisors on scene. There usually is a presentation accompanying that. Had the opportunity to review your social media platforms, and in addition, assuming they took your phone when they took you into custody at that time, so they had your phone. Now, after reviewing all that information, why Sheriff Bianco made the statements that he made in regard to you, Mr. Miller, is beyond me, because as an investigator, if there was a serious threat or a crime beyond that misdemeanor violations, then you could have conducted a bail enhancement. You could request a bail enhancement. They would have cite denied you. They would have charged you with felonies. So I find it self-serving on Sheriff Bianco's part, to make those allegations to get more media attention, because he is reportedly going to announce after the election that his campaign for the governor of California. So with that being said, I will tell you this, before I retired, I spoke to a member of his executive staff, and I questioned some of the decisions that were being made out of the executive office. And that individual told me that every decision that Sheriff Bianco makes is a political one. So he views things through the lens of politics, And so when you view things through the lens of politics, you lose sight of what's right and what's wrong and what evidence there is. So he made allegations that you had multiple IDs, different fictitious names. I don't know. I haven't seen any of that. If you make those allegations, I think you should show that and prove to the public that you're being truthful. And they should have been booked into evidence, quite frankly. And this isn't the first time Sheriff Bianco made such allegations without merit. I want to say in 2022, after the Dobbs decision came out, people vandalized the historic courthouse. It's a beautiful courthouse in Riverside County. It's the Riverside County Historic Courthouse. And he almost immediately accused 3 female members of the Riverside City Council of participating and encouraging such conduct, which is far from the truth. Ultimately, he later retracted that and apologized to 2. And then he singled out one member of the Riverside City Council that on a previous post, and I'll try to find that post. It's probably floating around. It was in the media, where he said, if we had evidence of a crime, you would be arrested, something to that effect. Unfortunately, there was no crime committed by this council member, and there was no evidence. And ultimately, that led into a defamation lawsuit, which I believe was settled, but I don't know the details on that. So when we look at it from an investigative perspective, you're saying things that are for political gain, a political stunt, and in the same time, really disparaging you, Mr. Miller, and linking you to something that is, grossly disgusting and grossly illegal, if true, but I don't believe it is true. So, I mean, those are just some examples. That is just my take on what I see and what I'm aware of your investigation. But it's, the culture of dishonesty runs deep right now in the organization. Prime example was, I worked on a case, People v. Samuel Flores. And if anyone wants to look it up in Riverside County Superior Court, it's RIF 2010090, I believe is the case number. Mm-hmm. Well, in that particular one, that involved lien sale vehicles with a tow company. There was no, in my opinion, there was no crime, committed on that. People buy lien sales all the time. But to take that and turn that into some type of crime and conspiracy, I thought was, inappropriate. I thought it was wrong from the beginning. I was still working at the time. And it was discussed maybe once or twice in the commander's meeting. And of course, when you get a bunch of captains together with their chiefs and executive staff, they always have questions that can't be answered. Well, during the trial, I sat in during the trial as a defense investigator, and it was disgusting to see people from the sheriff's department, being allowed to lie on the stand in the Flores case. And it was equally disgusting to see, the prosecutors go along with it. Now, I can tell you, DA Mike Hestron probably has no knowledge of this, because he's not a gentleman that tolerates dishonesty. He really isn't. And that's my experience with DA Hestron. I knew him when he was a prosecutor. He doesn't tolerate dishonesty, so I don't think he was aware of it. And I can provide you examples of the misleading statements made by the witnesses on the prosecution side. I mean, that case in and of itself is amazing, because so many people in the department, in the law enforcement profession in general, purchase lien sale vehicles quite often. It's open to the public. It's also open to the members of law enforcement and first responders. So, there are other issues that, that come to mind. For example, Dennis Ruman, he's a retired undersheriff. He went to work for National Public Safety Group, and lo and behold, they get I'm told they get a $2.5 million contract with the sheriff's department. Of course, the question I had was, that proposal set out for bid? Did they get 3 quotes, or didn't they? Or is National Public Safety Group what we call a sole source vendor? They're the only people who who can do the work that we request, and they're a law enforcement software developer, from what I understand. So there are other issues going on in the sheriff's department, other than accusing people of crimes. We know that that's a behavior of Sheriff Bianco. He's done it before in the past, with members of the city council. I think he's doing that with, he's done that with, I think, a member of the Palm Springs city council. There was a dispute over there. That was a political, disagreement on a lot of issues. I don't think he ever got the nerve to charge that particular person with anything. So, but the Flores matter is very interesting to me, because it impacts the department as a whole, because so many people buy lien sale cars, and to single out, three individuals, right? There's actually four, to single out three individuals and hold them responsible for the individuals of one, which was a deputy, Kevin Carpenter, which, interesting enough, he towed a lot of vehicles, quite frankly. All the vehicles were legally towed. They were lawfully towed vehicles. Of this 15 or 18 month period, only 20 of them were found to be out of rotation. So how it works is, in Temecula, a tow company gets a week on, another tow company comes on. They had like 6 tow companies. So every 6 weeks, you have a week on rotation, and any vehicle towed by law enforcement, the sheriff's department, out of that station goes to that particular tow company that's on rotation. But you don't necessarily have to follow the rotation. You can go out of the rotation at the discretion of the needs of that particular vehicle. Say someone needs a heavy, which is like a heavy truck or semi, or someone needs a flatbed, stuff like that. But
so what was Sam Flores was a police officer, I've heard, and I've heard his wife was also a police officer. What went on there, you think?
We had a deputy that got in trouble. A deputy, Kevin Carpenter, got in trouble. He had been going through some marital issues, which ultimately his trouble spilled over into the department. And to alleviate some of that and help Deputy Kevin Carpenter out at the time, Captain Lisa McConnell worked with the executive staff and had him transferred to a less demanding assignment called court services. But Captain McConnell also approved him to come back to work overtime at the Temecula station, not only once, but twice. So each approval is a 6-month period. So she approved it twice, giving him a year to come back and work overtime. So he was working overtime after 5 p.m. into the early AM hours. So, and he was towing vehicles to a tow company, DJ's Towing, and he kept towing vehicles to DJ's Towing. Kevin had a relationship with DJ's Towing, but so did everybody else. Kevin, so did the sergeant, so did Flores, who was the lieutenant, so did other lieutenants. So ultimately, they were singled out on these 20 out of rotation tows over a 15 to 18-month period. And they were singled out by the department to make this, into some type of conspiracy for bribery on a contract that doesn't exist, and never existed under Captain McConnell's command, And interesting enough, the investigator at the time was a young deputy. He was Deputy Nicholas Jones. He ultimately got promoted to investigator on this. And during the trial, he made some false and misleading statements under oath, which after the trial, he abruptly quit. Left the department. And people were telling me he made statements to the fact that he can't do this anymore, and he left. So a prime example of one of his statements he made under oath is, we had some veterans on the jury. So to appeal to those veterans, they allowed him to testify to his experience, his experience in the Marine Corps. If you joined the military, God bless you. I have so many family members in the military. It's unbelievable, right? I love the military. I'm a military brat myself, but in this trial. They were able to admit his military service as part of his investigative experience. So here we have a young sergeant who had who was a platoon leader. His MOS was 03011, I believe. He's a combat infantryman. So a platoon leader in the Marine Corps runs, maybe 4 to 6 Marines, combat Marines, right? These are boots on the ground. Well, he stated that, while he was in Afghanistan, he conducted a bribery investigation on an Afghan national police chief. And during that Afghan national police chief, was ultimately removed, according to him. Keep in mind, there's no documentation supporting this. Additionally, he said he derived his authority to conduct a criminal investigation on a civilian Afghan national under the Status Forces Agreement, which is absolutely false. It was a lie. At the time of combat, there was no Status Forces Agreement. And the current Status Forces Agreement they had, after, pretty much combat had we went from a combat force fighting to, I would say, more of a occupied force trying to develop a nation. It's strictly stated in that Status Forces Agreement that they'll conduct no criminal investigation of Afghan nationals, right? And that's pretty standard, from what I understand. Again, also he said he attended a training at Camp Pendleton specifically focused on conducting criminal investigations. However, on his DD-214, there was no training listed, so he said they don't do the training. So that and testifying to, conducting an interview 5 years ago in 2019. I won't say the gentleman's name. He conducted an interview. I'll give his initials as BM. He conducted an interview with BM, and BM said he bought his lean cell vehicle, which was a 79 Corvette, from an individual named Hernandez. And the DA's office said it basically had said in their questioning that other than the 79 Corvette Flores received for free, what else did Flores get? Well, he didn't get any vehicle. There's no evidence of him ever purchasing a vehicle. I actually tracked after that testimony by Jones. We actually tracked down BM, interviewed BM. BM said he never spoke to anybody from the Riverside County Sheriff's Department or the Riverside County DA's office. Now, with that being said, if there are no reports and no recordings, then why is the prosecutor, Deputy District Attorney Natasha Soresi, why is she allowing, and Dave Allen, why are they allowing their investigating officer, Investigator Nicholas Jones, to testify things that there's no supporting documentation with it, And in another case, during this same trial, and also, was a retired sergeant who testified to exhibits authenticating photographs of a residence in Oceanside that he's never seen or never been to. And under cross-examination, that he admitted to that. So how does the DA's office allow this individual to authenticate a property that he's never seen or never been to? Quite frankly. And then ultimately, he said he thought he saw a picture of it from Mr. Flores, and it kind of looked similar to it. But you authenticate it as is. This is the residence in question in the city of Oceanside. So, that's just a snippet of it. My partner, Joel Morales, he's a retired LAPD and Riverside County Sheriff Sergeant. He was the lead defense investigator on the Flores matter. I came in after I retired because of the injustices. But they really, this particular case was one that every witness was discredited, and the result, the end result was, unacceptable, but there's nothing I can do about that. But what we can do is
sorry to interrupt you. Are you saying that every single person that was on that case was tasked to lie by the sheriff? Is that what you're saying?
No, I believe Nicholas Jones lied on the stand intentionally. He continually changed his story. He talked about interviews that he didn't have documentation of. In fact, the defense, Joel Morales filed a complaint with the sheriff's department of dishonesty, right? They came back and said I believe it was unfounded. They sent the letter back, it was unfounded. Well, there's clear and convincing evidence based on the grand jury transcripts, and we'll be happy to share that with you, based on the trial transcripts that are pending, and we'll be happy to share that with you, that Nicholas Jones and several other employees, lied on the stand. But, you can't, the problem with finding someone was dishonest was that particular investigation is forwarded to the state, the Peace Officer Standard and Training agency that oversees law enforcement training and certification. If they find out dishonesty is one of the 9 areas where they can revoke your certificate and you cannot be a peace officer in the state of California. So they're very reluctant to say, oh yeah, this person lied, when in fact is you should have done an investigation. A prime example of lying. In March of 2020, there were grand jury proceedings in the Flores matter. During the Flores matter, then Deputy Jones testified. Deputy DA Allen and Deputy DA Emily Hanks were the prosecutors who presented the case in the grand jury, according to the transcripts. And they talked about the CHP service tow agreement. This is a tow agreement for tow companies who are going to go on rotation and tow vehicles at the request of law enforcement. Well, this is a CHP one. Now, during the grand jury, they said that this was the tow agreement in place at the Temecula station under the command of Captain Lisa McConnell, right? And per Deputy Jones at the time, and everyone signed it. Well, the reality is there was no signed CHP service tow agreement at the Temecula station, right? Nobody signed it. All Captain Lisa McConnell required was, if CHP okays you, then we'll okay you. You just have to have a yard within the city limits or within the jurisdiction of the Temecula station. So, and that is an example of lying to the grand jury. Reading the grand jury transcripts, and I never realized, because I've been involved in grand jury proceedings before, but I never realized when they say you can indict a ham sandwich, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. They ignored the procedures and policies of the department. They attributed Lieutenant Sam Flores as bringing back Kevin Carpenter solely to tow vehicles. Well, that's inaccurate. The only person that can bring Kevin Carpenter back to the Temecula station was Captain McConnell. Captain McConnell even had him continue to be the Explorer advisor. These are young kids, young teens, 14, young adults to 21 that may have an interest in a career in law enforcement, so they can be an explorer. It was Captain McConnell who shielded and protected Kevin Carpenter. But on a side note, she wasn't held responsible for anything, maybe because she dated Sheriff Bianco back in the 90s when we were all deputies. I'm not slandering anybody. I'm not slinging mud. That's just a fact. That is just a stone cold fact, wow. Right? So she was the commander responsible, but she was not held accountable for anything. She stored items at DJ's Tow. She borrowed a flatbed truck from S&R Towing using their resources, for the Christmas parade. So when you talk about someone who has the authority to approve or deny a contract, it isn't a lieutenant or a sergeant. It was a captain. I was a captain. I know it was only a captain can do that, and a captain above. So when you look at the Flores matter, all these people who testified and the selective enforcement to Sam, it's disheartening. It's a conspiracy. I don't know what Sam and Robert Cristolon did to McConnell or Bianco to be treated this way, but it's absolutely embarrassing.
I mean, you're talking about a lot of things here which indicate that Sheriff Bianco should have been removed a long time ago. Why hasn't he been removed? Why hasn't there been proceedings to have him removed? I mean, I've heard the DA certainly, I mean, you were saying a lot of nice things about the DA, but unfortunately, I haven't heard such nice things. I've heard that the DA, just rather than check and balancing him, he kind of acts like a protective mechanism for all the wrongdoing. So, I mean, tell me a little bit about that. Like, what is going on in these departments? Why is there so much lies and corruption? And why is he not being held accountable?
Well, I mean, the DA has gone on record that they're good friends, that they go fishing, and their family are friends. So he's gone on record. Most of those videos on YouTube and their outings together have been taken down. So maybe that friendship has influenced Hestrin, but my experience with Hestrin has always been one of, he followed the law, he followed the evidence, and prosecuted when prosecution was needed, and he engaged in plea bargains when plea bargains, were appropriate. I can tell you, one deputy DA had said that they're not allowed to plea bargain with RSO members who are accused of a crime. They are to take it as far as they can, regardless of the classification of the crime. For example, I know of one incident where it was a misdemeanor violation, and normally misdemeanor violations get probation. They're in community service or some type of, schooling, some type of course that they take. But they weren't offering it to this individual. This individual had to inform the judge through his attorney that he's being treated differently, because of his employment, and he shouldn't be treated differently in the court of law. He should be treated and given the opportunity to rehabilitate, pay his debt to society, rehabilitate himself, and like anyone else. Ultimately, he achieved that goal, because that's I think DA Hestrin probably knows about that. The only order to not negotiate with RSO members who are accused of a crime has to come from the top, someone from the executive staff. And my experience with, like I said, my experience with Hestrin's always been positive. So, but you're absolutely correct that, there is this ongoing belief that, Hestrin, is doing the bidding of Chad when it comes to prosecuting. And prime example is the Michael Yarbrough case, and that occurred in 2021. Now, that case is a matter of public record. Michael Yarbrough was a sergeant. He was on call at the time, from what I understand, and he saw an individual walk into a bar and grill that had testified at a previous trial. And my understanding, the jury came back with a not guilty verdict. Well, Sergeant Yarbrough walked over there and attacked that individual, resulting in what's called a battery in violation of Penal Code Section 242. Now, if you get convicted of Penal Code Section 242 in California, battery, you lose your right to possess a firearm for 10 years, right? This was all set to go to trial. And incidentally, the initial judge in this case at the time of the incident issued an emergency protective order. And in the emergency protective order, he ordered Yarbrough to surrender all his firearms to the sheriff's department, right? So what happens when they issue that order is the sheriff's department or your local law enforcement agency where you live takes your guns for safekeeping, because that's what the judge has ordered. There's no evidence he turned in his guns. And in fact, there was an email that ultimately was floating around from then Captain Kenneth Paulson. He's retired from the Professional Standards Bureau, who said we shouldn't get involved in this. Well, you're not getting it. Why aren't you getting involved with it? It's an employee and it's accused of a crime. Well, there's no evidence of it. And to dovetail off that is, once you turn in your guns for safekeeping, you have to fill out some paperwork with DOJ, and the DOJ will give you the authorization to return those guns to that individual. You just can't walk in and get your guns. You have to fill out like an application through DOJ requesting your guns back, and they'll look further into this allegation of battery. So with that being said, just before trial, I was just before trial, the district attorney offered Mr. Yarbrough a plea into a 415. So there was a negotiation there that no one else had. No one that I know who's been arrested as an employee had that opportunity to a 415, Penal Code Section 415, which is disturbing the peace. So if you're convicted of disturbing the peace, you can keep your guns. And then he remained employed, right, for another year, and then honorably retired. And that Sheriff Bianco presented him with a retirement badge and posted it on Instagram. And as soon as he posted that, I received numerous calls, because I get calls from people all over the department, asking me why, why are we doing this, and asking me for advice. And, I also say I don't never get any calls, because I like yourself, you get information, you keep it confidential. You don't name any names, right? So in this particular case, everybody was curious on why. One, he kept working with an emergency protective order. Ultimately, those complaints reached Sheriff Bianco, and they were forced to place him on administrative leave. And Yarbrough made a mistake. He was held accountable for it. He was given, from in the eyes of a lot of people in the department, preferential treatment, compared to what people are going through now when they're accused of a crime, and was honorably retired. So when you see a disparaging treatment, between one employee versus another employee when they violate a crime. So other things, and I believe, there was another incident with Assistant Sheriff Gunzel, who sent a Captain John Moore an email regarding a campaign contributor to Sheriff Bianco regarding tickets he was getting, because he owned a trucking company out of Jurupa Valley, and Jurupa Valley has a commercial enforcement deputy. Jurupa Valley is a hub for warehouses in the northwest area of Riverside County, and those vehicles have to be maintained. If they're poorly maintained, they become a hazard to other motorists in the community. And so that's why a commercial deputy enforcement position was created out of the city of Jurupa Valley. Well, ultimately, they were asked to do something with these tickets, and Captain Moore, denied. He's not going to be ticket fixing. They can go to court like everybody else. But this wasn't the first time. I'm told he did it there was an incident out of Moreno Valley, allegations of tickle. I'm going to say allegations. I know about the one in Jurupa because I seen the email, and allegations of the same conduct out of this Paris station. So with that being said, the assistant sheriff was placed on administrative leave and now allowed to honorably retire the following day, a day after he was placed on administrative leave. He retires, and the investigation typically stops there. But, I disagree with that. Once there's an allegation, it should be thoroughly investigated, and at a commander's meeting, Sheriff Bianco said that it was investigated by the DA's office, and it was a nothing burger. So the email speaks for itself. I don't think it's a nothing burger when you're asking people to do something inappropriate, like, recall tickets that already been processed, so, those are some of the things that I see, the pattern of accusing people of a crime without evidence. Now I'm hearing that Sheriff Bianco said, "Oh, he got bad information." You didn't get bad information. I am confident that the people who provided you, the deputy who wrote the report, uploaded his body-worn camera video into the server. Not only that deputy, but every deputy who came in contact with you, Mr. Miller, they upload their body-worn camera at the end of their shift. It's a cradle. You plug it in the cradle. It automatically charges your body-worn camera, and it automatically downloads your body-worn camera. That body-worn camera is assigned to you. It goes into a server, and it's held, right? So the body-worn camera footage is available,
So I got a question about that, because, okay, so the viewer knows The minute this thing happened and I started really telling the truth and getting on media and podcasts, we started getting a deluge of whistleblower evidence and testimony. I'm talking about thousands of pages. I'm talking about multiple individuals that were coming out and reporting things like what you've said: fraud, corruption, crimes committed by Bianco under the color of law, using his badge as protection. We even heard that the DA always protects him. We've heard that he fabricates evidence, right? And one of the things I noticed is that, and this was days after, he's still coming out on interviews, and he's basically saying things like, oh, wait till you see, what Vem did, wait till you see his behavior with my deputy, things that are simply completely untrue, because I know I was a Boy Scout the whole time. The only time I ever even slightly raised my voice is after multiple times when a couple of instances. One, I wasn't given supplements and medication. Another instance was when I was put in the back of a hot police car that was 110 degrees, and I was feeling faint and I was getting heart palpitations, being deprived of my medication. Even then, I just was like, come on, dude, like, help. What are you doing? More appealing to him. And then the other instance was when I never got my phone calls despite asking, like literally a dozen times, and having this guy ignore me, literally play with his cell phone like this in front of me after I've asked him numerous times, right? So when he started coming out and started talking about things that I know 100% are not on the body cams. In fact, the body cams, if not altered, if not changed due to fraudulent means, are going to show exactly that I was a Boy Scout. Everything I've said is true. And in fact, we don't even need the body cams, because guess what? I recorded 12 hours of things happening, starting with me approaching the police officer, declaring my guns before even attempting to enter the parking lot. So their entire narrative was false. He had come out and he said these guns were discovered. He had come out and said, wait till you see these fake IDs, all this nonsense. Everything is demonstrably untrue. But when one of the whistleblowers, actually a number of whistleblowers, told me Bianco's known for fabricating evidence, they'll literally edit footage. I even heard the use of AI to create fiction. Is this what he's relying on? Have you heard about these sort of things where he does criminal things to basically hide, conceal? You're saying that people are lying on his behalf, but tell me more. Is there more to this fraud and criminality of Bianco?
I believe so, and I'm going to base it again on the Flores case, because I have firsthand knowledge on the Flores case. For example, during the Flores case, they downloaded everybody's phones, right? They downloaded a couple phones. Actually, it was one of the defendant's phones. He was a civilian. They downloaded his phone, but when they turned over the text messages and the phone calls they downloaded, that they conveniently withheld 230 text messages. And that was with the DA's office. It wasn't discovered for several years later when you're reviewing the text message, because I reviewed, I think it was 8,111 pages of text messages. And I always wondered why you would get a text message at 9 o'clock in the morning, and then the next text message is at 6 p.m. You're telling me there was no communication between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. out of 8, so this happened frequently. And ultimately, what was discovered that, either the DA's, I believe the DA admitted they redacted 230 text messages. I don't know why they would do that. You give the defendants everything, and then you argue about what you're going to use in court before the judge. The investigation, then Nicholas Jones, when he did his investigation, one of the individuals, for some reason, he ignored the fact that he was in possession of stolen guns, and that he had filed a false insurance claim that previous year in the county of San Bernardino. So picking and choosing when you're going to enforce the law and how you're going to enforce the law, I think in itself is corrupt. You investigate and crimes fair and objectively evaluating the evidence. Bianco did, I would say, evaluate the evidence in your case, Mr. Miller, because he had all the information at his hand. So the question to me is, what in the information that he had that was in that police report, that body worn camera footage, your social media platforms, what information did he have to make the statement that he probably foiled, assassination attempt, right? That is just dereliction of duty. That's unethical. It's unprofessional. It's disingenuous to make that leap of I think in his press conference he said it's common sense and reality. Well, what the common sense and reality? That's his common sense and reality. And if we go by Sheriff Bianco's common sense and reality, if he doesn't like you, everybody he doesn't like will be in jail. And those people who he does like will get a sweet deal from a battery charge or assault with a deadly weapon charge, right, to a disturbing the peace charge, and summary probation for a year, and then honorably retire. So that's most of my experience is with the Flores matter. I know another case. He is fighting the case where two master investigators did an investigation and said there was no crime there, but yet no, he didn't believe that. He says no, there's something there, and then he took that investigation away from two master investigators. So to get to the rank of master investigator, you really have about 20 years on the department. You have to do a case presentation to a panel, and a panel of experts in the area of criminal investigations within the department. And then they make a decision on whether your investigative skill sets rises to a level of the title and pay associated with master investigator. So in this particular one, they took the case away from the master investigators, gave it to other investigators. They then told them to find the evidence. Well, there is no evidence to be found. They submitted the case to the DA's office. The DA's office said, we've already rejected this case. The DA's office let it sit until the employee called them and said, hey, what's going on with this case? And they said, nothing. We're not going to file anything on it. And Sheriff Bianco, once he gets his mindset, it was like, I don't care. Find the evidence. Well, evidence isn't there. There was another case, and Sheriff Bianco likes to say he's this, Christian sheriff, former member of, the Oath Keepers, a constitutional sheriff, but for someone who's supposed to be this Christian, he sure does lie a lot, in my opinion. He sure does. And he has no problem doing it. When the captain came down and put me on admin leave 2 weeks before I retired, he couldn't tell me why I'm on admin leave. And no one could tell me why I was on admin leave. Nobody. And then when my retirement, because, you put in your request for retirement and the date several months before, so the department can start looking for someone to fill your position and move people around in the organization. I was going to say move people around the chessboard, but you'll find soon enough that Sheriff Bianco plays checkers while everybody else plays chess.
Yeah, totally. I mean, he's sending like threats to me through podcasts now, where he says, well, he'll never be able to afford it. He's going to spend a whole bunch of money. He's almost looking at the corruption, frankly, of how our legal system works, in that in order to go after somebody that's corrupt like this, you need millions of dollars. That's left basically up to an elite that could afford it. Most people can't find lawyers on contingency. So he also looks at the fact that lawsuits are expensive as a way of people being prohibited from bringing him to justice, bringing matters to justice. Is that something that you've heard before?
Yeah, he likes to wait people out. I mean, especially when it comes to employees, he likes to wait people out, because when you lose your job, he'll tell you, well, I don't care, fire them. It'll take them 2 years to get their job back, and then they'll be broke. That he tries to wait you out financially. And he hides behind the fact that, yes, he is an elected official. Yes, he is the sheriff of Riverside County. So he has those resources. He has county council, and the county, supporting him. But his conduct, but he's also cost the county millions of dollars. I don't know if you saw the article out of the New York Times and the Desert Sun. Christopher Damian did did a piece on the jail deaths, you know.
Could you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, I've definitely seen it, but I like the viewers
Mhm.
that haven't read it to know all about it.
Well, I mean, there was a rash of jail deaths, you know, and 19 jail in custody deaths that occurred, and that encompasses murders, overdoses, and suicides. Well, um, you know, I would say that the lack of staffing in our corrections bureau is a contributing factor to the lack of performance by the deputies. So so when you have lack of staffing, and I think this goes back to when Sheriff Bianco decided he was going to remove all sworn personnel, as many sworn personnel out of the jails and put them in the field so he can fill special assignments, and that's within his authority, but the staffing at the jails suffered. So, you have to have proper supervision and care for the in custodies. And you can't do that when you're short staffed. So in the jail deaths, they had people calling in, like in one suicide that was depicted in Christopher Damien's article was a Miss Upton. She called in to the pod through the intercom system and said, the deputy said something to the effect is this an emergency? And she said, no, I don't think so, and hung up on her. Well, her cell, because she's a mental health in custody, her cell was equipped with a camera, and they monitor you 24 hours a day. So she is seen walking around, and captured on recording saying, I'll show you, you don't think I'll do it. And she fastened the noose, unfortunately, she fastened a noose around her neck and hung herself. And it was several minutes later that the deputy finally looked at the camera, the monitor, and broadcasted that there was a man down. And by that time, this poor young lady was, had already died. It's and that's one of the consequences, of not having, having poor staffing, low morale, right? Not enough oversight. But if you look at, you can probably research Chad Bianco's podcast where he talks about these jail deaths, and what he talks about in one incident, he talks about this individual just always likes to swallow things. And so he swallowed things, he swallowed pencils, he swallowed soap and everything, and ultimately he died. And in Riverside County, the sheriff is the coroner. So, Sheriff Bianco ruled the in custody death as an accident, and completely ignored the fact that this guy was suicidal on a number of occasions. This guy wrote that he needed help, that he wanted to kill himself. Can you help me? Can you help me? Stuff like that. He wrote grievances asking for help, and nobody helped him. But this is another example of the misleading and disingenuous statements by Sheriff Bianco in his podcast to say that this guy just likes to swallow stuff and therefore he suffocated and died, as opposed to, and certified that as an accident, as opposed to talking about his suicidal attempts, his suicidal ideations, and ruling his death an accident as opposed to an in custody suicide. So when you start misleading the public, and I've always been a firm believer of, you tell the public, you ask the question, there's two things that you should keep in mind. Either one, you're unable to answer the question because it's an ongoing investigation, or two, you tell the truth. You don't sugarcoat it. You don't minimize it. You just tell the truth. That way, the public, understands that you as a sheriff is going to be truthful to them. But right now, the public doesn't believe Sheriff Bianco as a truthful and honest person, and nor do the employees. A lot of the employees I've spoken to, and I've been retired for 4 years, and I've been trying to stay clear, but it's just disheartening when you put 31 years and some change into an organization. And I worked for five sheriffs. 4 of them were really excellent sheriffs. Sheriff Bianco being the 5th one, but he when he said he was going to change the culture of the department, he sure did. He changed the culture of the department to where their leader they see their leader, Sheriff Bianco, being a very disingenuous person when he talks about things, and they're losing. And then when the employees lose faith and trust in their leader, what do you think the general public is doing? The general public is looking at Sheriff Bianco and like, why are you lying? And keep in mind, law enforcement, it's very critical. Law enforcement, this is not a Democrat thing. This is not a Republican thing. This is law enforcement. This is a public safety thing. Your investigation to be fair, objective, thorough, representing the facts. You're talking about evidence. You're talking about you had all these passports, you had these IDs and fictitious names. Well, produce it. Produce it. But he's not going to produce it because in Sheriff Bianco's world, according to one of his executive staff members, he looks at everything through the lens of politics. So that's why it's my opinion that he made those outrageous statements and comments during his press release because of his political aspirations to be the governor.
Right? Could I mention one other thing? Because to make those kind of statements, right, you would have to think that there's no way the truth is going to come out.
Yes, that's absolutely correct. And that is one thing that you don't think the truth is coming out. By the way, my intel in the department is they were caught off guard that you surreptitiously recorded their contact out of your vehicle. You said, so
I'm an investigative journalist and a documentary filmmaker of like many years, and there's something called instinct, and this is something that I interviewed because I've done a lot of shows with FBI members, whether it went to pilot, whether it went to series, whether it was just a presentation or sizzle reel. But my experiences have been some of the best. Law enforcement, they have something called instinct, and in fact, I work with gentlemen that were literally the frontline investigators for the El Chapo case, because they were working out of Memphis. And El Chapo, the way he used to ship his drugs is that they would be distributed out of the South in essentially semis that they would make it look like it's produce and meat, right? So there would be the crack cocaine or whatever hidden behind that stuff. And what happens is that the police officers usually don't want to open those kind of trucks unless they know there's something in there, because once you open it, you've spoiled the vegetation and the meat. And so they're hesitant, right? So long and short is working with these guys, I learned a lot. I learned about, a lot about the instinct of people, but what I also learned about was corruption and members of the feds that were actually working with Chapo, that were getting paid off in law enforcement too. And it seems as though Chad Bianco is one of the corrupt ones that, he's lacking instinct. But what is curious for me is this, right? The way he said those lies, number one, yes, the recording caught him off guard because he thought most likely that he could fabricate the recording. He could twist it how he wanted to. Now he has no choice but to, run smack dab into reality. The other thing that happened is that a day after he made his public announcement calling me essentially, the third assassin, and I'm a lunatic, and that he knows for sure that I was there to do something wrong. All of a sudden, a rogue anti-terrorism force from Las Vegas Metro Police Department, which I've been told was not an authorized unit, I know that they had no warrant, came to my parents' home where they thought I was living, because since 2022, my address has been concealed because of the kind of content we do. I've actually gotten death threats mailed to my house. So when I moved to a new location, I made sure that address wasn't on file. But in terms of the mail that I receive, some of the mail goes to my parents' home, right? Because I don't want the address on record, right? So they come to my parents' home thinking that I'm there. And there's a lot of things that bother me about that incident, because first of all, it seems like it was a rogue unit. I'm assuming that this was a call Sheriff Bianco made to his buddies in the Las Vegas Metro Police Department, which, by the way, he has a house in Las Vegas. He has roots in Las Vegas. He knows people in the police force in Las Vegas. And the fact that these guys were anti-terrorism has always bothered me, because all of a sudden, if you deem somebody to be a terrorist, there's a lack of due process. You could interrogate them indefinitely without counsel. You could also kill that person and have less due process and just say, hey, we just killed a terrorist. He flinched. I could have been reaching for a water bottle. They gunned me down. So I think to myself, okay, first, he didn't know that I'd recorded everything, so he thought he could fabricate that. Basically criminal, more or less. I mean, it is a criminal if you're doing fabricating evidence, right? Regardless of if he has a badge. That's why I keep saying he's performing under the color of law, because he's basically a criminal using his badge to cover up his criminal deeds, in my opinion. And then the other thing that I think about was he actually thinking we're just going to gun this guy down and close it off completely? And when you're talking about so many people that have died in his custody, and I've heard other things too, by the way, like deputies that gunned down a guy because he reached for a water bottle. I just think, was that part of the plan, that he thought he was going to shut it down regardless, and the truth would never come out?
Right. I'll comment two things. The department has a member on the Joint Terrorism Task Force in Riverside County, right? I think they're based out of the San Bernardino federal office. But our sister JTTF, Joint Terrorism Task Force, is Las Vegas. So same with other federal task force. You have the IRAT task force, which is a federal FBI task force. They have task force, our sister task forces in Vegas. So it wouldn't surprise me that the deputy or investigator assigned to the Riverside County Joint Terrorism Task Force had our task force locally call over there and say, hey, can you go over to check on this property, and this is what we're looking for. And that wouldn't surprise me at all, because how did Las Vegas know so fast to go to your house? They have that pipeline through the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which we have deputies and investigators assigned to that task force. Now, you talked about the water bottle incident regarding a deputy-involved shooting. Here's another one for you. In 2020, there was an individual who stole a truck in an empty horse trailer that eventually ended up getting stuck in wine country, somewhere out there on a dirt road. The individual who stole the truck got out of the vehicle, started to run away. At that time, a deputy shot multiple times at that suspect, ultimately striking that suspect in the back. And this is the department reportedly did a search via air and ground with canine, and didn't find the suspect who stole the vehicle, and that the suspect that they shot. Ultimately, this individual's loved ones went out there searching, and they found their loved one. Right now, the deputy, there was an investigator who quoted saying that, it took a lot to clear this deputy. The deputies, shot the guy in the back. He's unarmed. There's no excuse for that, other than the fact that they rationalized the justification and said that, the deputies, according to one of the investigators I spoke to, a station investigator, said because she said the sun was in her eyes, so she feared for her life and shot. And I'm like, wait a minute, that's not what the law states. The law states you have to articulate a credible threat. Was there a gun in his hand? Did they point the gun at you? Did they raise the gun in a threatening manner? And did you fear for your life or the life of those individuals around you? Of course, this occurred in 2020 when I was still, we discussed it in 2020. I was still working, and I worked homicide for 10 years, and I worked deputy involved shootings, a number of them. And I said, you can't justify this. This is not justified. But I don't make those decisions. I expressed my investigative opinion, and it was ultimately the deputy was cleared. The case was sent, to the DA's office, and the DA's office cleared the deputy.
So this is where we get back to the DA, because you said a lot of nice things about the DA. Unfortunately, I haven't heard those nice things. I've heard that basically Bianco and the DA work hand in hand to cover up crimes, to fabricate evidence, that they're in cahoots with one another. And now what we're talking about is essentially two state units or state departments ignoring what the feds say, basically giving a big FU to the feds that have already said this guy's clear, there's no issue with this guy, which happened literally 2 hours after the arrest. And then they go completely rogue. But the feds aren't going after him, even though he's clearly doing criminal things. The DA's not going after him, even though he's doing criminal things. You just named literally a dozen things that this man has done that sounded criminal. That would be justification for the DA at least to launch an investigation. Right. But yet none of that's happening. What's going on?
And those loved ones complained to the California Attorney General's office, and the California Attorney General has opened a civil rights violation investigation into Sheriff Bianco and the department in regarding these deaths. So, and that's a good thing, because that has taken it out of Riverside County. Because whenever like any other county, the sheriff of the county has influence. The sheriff of the county, he has influence. When you take it in the attorney general's office, you're looking at people who are assigned up and down the state. They work for the California Attorney General and Department of Justice, and they'll conduct a fair and impartial investigation. And those findings are anticipated. It's not going to be a quick investigation. They're gonna go slow and right, as opposed to fast and wrong and footloose, like Sheriff Bianco seems to do on a consistent basis. And they're going to follow the evidence. They're going to follow the facts. The department has already been sued and won by the prison law office in regards to our corrections bureau issues. Corrections should be a top priority, within the organization, because there are deficiencies there. There are staffing deficiencies there. There are, medical and mental health. They made huge leaps and bounds from what I understand, but there's still work to be done, and if you don't have the support of the sheriff, then those funds needed to correct those deficiencies are going elsewhere. For for example, you have a fentanyl task force. Well, you already have a narcotics task force. Why add a fentanyl task force? Just fold that into the narcotics. And I'm talking about staffing and deployment issues, that are negatively impacting our corrections bureau and the overall public safety of the county, in my opinion. But yeah, you're absolutely correct. I've been hearing that as well from multiple employees, not only from the sheriff's department, from other agencies, and a few individuals from the DA's office as well. One deputy DA said he rejected cases on a consistent basis, and basically said he wasn't going to do Bianco's dirty work, because there's this thing now, if you get charged with a crime, that once you get charged with a crime, Sheriff Bianco will put you on admin leave and then do a admin investigation and terminate you regardless, and then try to get your post certificate suspended, on it as well. So, and I heard that from quite a number of people, that just seems to be the way things are going now. And the sheriff the elected sheriff has a lot of authority, and you have to respect that authority, and you have to exercise that authority, judiciously, and you need to do it fairly and objectively, quite frankly. And I can tell you, the employees are now seeing what they helped get into office, because the association, initially gave Bianco $1 million to run, and they gave him more money when I ran against him unsuccessfully in the last election,
Wow.
Which was surprising to me, is the register of voters seemed to have mishandled my paperwork.
Wow.
They do this all the time. How did they mishandle my paperwork?
I've heard that sort of thing too. Now, let me ask you, does this sheriff, because you're saying, he's the coroner or has the final say, I've heard about just how broad his powers are. Does this sheriff have way too much power that, absolute power corrupts absolutely? I mean, is that what's going on?
I believe so. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why Sacramento passed a law stating at the discretion of the County Board of Supervisors, they can create an oversight committee, a public safety oversight committee, which I wholeheartedly endorsed. I believe in order to regain the integrity of the office, regain the public trust, that you need to have an oversight committee of the public. For example, maybe an 9 to 11 man, a person committee. We need people from all 5 districts, some nonprofits, some, maybe someone from the NAACP, the ACLU, and even the media, so have someone from the public defender's office, have someone from the DA's office, and then all the stakeholders and the public are all there to discuss, how do we better improve the sheriff's department and our law enforcement public agencies within the county, under the county umbrella. Of course, the police departments and cities aren't affected by a county public safety commission, but a public safety commission or public safety committee to help review and recommend things to improve the performance of the department. How do you continually say, no to that? They're there to provide you with, recommendations. They're there to provide you with support and provide you with criticism. You notice in Bianco's press conference, when a couple of the reporters asked him if he was being disingenuous or if he was being dramatic, did you see his facial expression? The nonverbal communications during his response was
he got angry.
yes.
He
He
got
does
angry.
not.
Yeah.
He's not an individual that accepts constructive criticism. And I can tell you that there used to be a disciplinary matrix that was approved by the department and both unions, the Riverside Sheriff's Association and the Law Enforcement Management Union. All right. I was in a commander's meeting when they talked about doing away with the disciplinary matrix. They're going to work on getting rid of that. And Sheriff Bianco said he was the only person that can, distribute or impose discipline in a fair and impartial manner, an objective manner. As soon as he said that, I knew we were dealing, this was early. I mean, within 6 months of his election in 2019, the command staff started whispering. We were whispering, talking about, oh, we're in trouble. When someone says that they're the only person that can do something, we're in trouble. And it is the fact that because he's elected, he can do whatever he wants, and he does whatever he wants, So, and you can peruse through his Instagram. Another incident that came up on Instagram was One Day Wrap in Murrieta. Excellent small company. If you ever want your car wrapped, go to One Day Wrap in Murrieta. They're excellent. They do an excellent job. They have a huge clientele, from what I understand, and even some celebrities. Well, the jail bus had a wrap, and it was reportedly through One Day Wrap. They did an excellent job. But next thing you know, that they are going to concerts together, pictures on Instagram, concerts together, and having dinner. Him and his buddy, Assistant Sheriff Lelliver, one of his buddies. I mean, they're having dinner and picture, and they're posting this on this Instagram. And here we are going through this so-called, bribery trial, for a DJ's towing to keep a tow contract that didn't exist. And my question was that $100,000 jail bus wrap, was there a request for quote? Did they get 3 requests for quotes and proposals for it? I don't know. And was that dinner and that concert put on, Sheriff Bianco's Form 700? Because he's the one that makes all the decision. He's the final authority. So when you talk about corruption and you talk about inappropriate, conduct, look at, follow the money. Prime example, the Coisburg Detention Center, they replaced their hood range in the kitchen, right? You know what I'm talking about. It's a stainless hood range. It just goes up there, hooks into the vent, and they attach it, right? I was told it was $400,000. No way. I was also told there was this like design feature or this design fee, like $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. Ultimately, my understanding is captain started complaining, and you just get the bottom line of the price of $400,000. And I could be wrong. I'm only getting this from the captain, the captain at the time, that they weren't allowed to look at the line item costs that created this such astronomical amount. And when you're not dealing with your money and you're dealing with vendors from Orange County, right? Because his Robert Gunzel was from Orange County, retired out of Orange County, brought his friend over from Orange County and to run the projects management unit. And that's all the projects within the department. And there was a noticeable decrease in Riverside County vendors and a noticeable increase in Orange County vendors. And then there was a notable increase in the secrecy of the line item cost of each item. How much do you think it is to replace a staff bathroom? Right, we're taking the old toilet out, putting a new toilet. We're taking the old sink out, putting in a new sink. We're taking the old paper towel dispenser out, putting in a new paper towel dispenser. So you're not creating a new design, but I believe they quoted that price at over $800,000 for the Robert Preston Detention Center. I mean, that's something like $30,000 a bathroom for staff bathrooms, because there's literally 8 floors. You have 7 floors, a basement, right? And there's a staff restroom on every floor, and that's that's incredible. I mean, they talked about, oh, well, that's prevailing wage. I go, since when is $30,000 to replace a toilet sink and a paper towel dispenser is prevailing wage? I don't know. I don't know. I'd say follow the money. Do
So
records requests.
it's so crazy. The other thing I want to mention is, I've been in fear for my life because I've been told that Bianco actually has, number one, he'll use the streets, and I'm talking about using, and being in this business, and I'm talking about journalism and media. I've heard stories over and over again, and I've known literally the heads of the Crips and Bloods. I'm talking about the guys that run it, because I used to be a hip hop music video director. I work with a lot of gangsters, and people could easily find this out about me, right? And not just the Crips and Bloods, by the way, East Coast gangs, Midwest gangs, you name it. And I know for a fact that corrupt cops, corrupt officials sometimes use the streets to off somebody that is implicating them in crimes. And I've heard Sheriff Bianco is this kind of individual, and I'm not, this is what I've heard. Any comments on that topic?
I don't think I too believe he's a vindictive individual, but I don't think he's vindictive to that degree. I don't think. I mean, I don't. What saves me is, I fully anticipate being charged for something. People always say, "Oh, Assistant Sheriff Lelliver was quoted by an individual who said, oh, we'll get Lujan, we'll get him, we'll find a way to get him." Well, it's been 4 years since I retired. I mean. I don't think Bianco is that dumb to sit and try to assassinate you, Mr. Miller. I just don't think that he's that dumb. I think if you come to Riverside County, I think you're going to be fine. I would just say stay in the city, where sheriff's department employees don't patrol, or like you did last time, you called in for your public comment. And I think, your public comment is important because it keeps it in the public purview, your case in the public purview, but I don't think you're in any danger. I don't think Bianco is that narcissistic. He has a narcissistic attitude. He's very emotional. He's one of those knee-jerk emotional leaders where, if you say he says something, he wants you to believe it. And now when you're firing back, and you saw that in the press conference when disparaging and disingenuous, he doesn't know how to answer those questions, when it's simply, no, I'm not being, or yes, I am. He'll never say yes. He'll never admit to him being wrong whatsoever. So, no, I don't think that you're in any danger, your life or anything. I think that, there's a core group of his supporters that have no problem, going online and trying to gaslight you and disparage you in every way, shape, or form. You see those people online all the time. It's been told to me by department members, there's probably about 100 of them that are department members with aliases and friends that constantly say he's the best sheriff in the world. And then some people from other places always ask him, what gauge are you using to say he's the best sheriff in the world? So.
Question about, something that we've heard again through whistleblowers is that a lot of police officers help Bianco essentially win the vote to get in office, right?
Yes.
And they were all stuck at, I believe, $70,000 pay. And he had promised them that he's going to get better pay, especially with the current situation with inflation. Once he got in office, he didn't get him the pay. Hence, a lot of these officers that felt, injured by, that potential lie. And I will leave that up to you to tell me if you've heard something similar. And now they're turning against him. That's why we've had so many of these whistleblowers come. One of the first things that they say is that he never got us what he promised. But then he apparently went and raised his pay. And on top of that, not only did he raise his pay, I've heard from a couple of sources that the board also raised their pay, and there was some kind of devil's handshake behind the scenes. Now, if you could dissect that entire statement that I just made, tell me what you know about those topics.
I don't know about a devil's handshake behind the scenes, but I do believe there's always some backdoor deal going on. So the elected officials, what happened is the elected officials get a set amount of salary, and they have what's called their second, right? So you have the sheriff, and then you have the undersheriff, right? Now they ultimately, because they are unrepresented management at that point, that they were really making more than the elected official, so what happens is the board of supervisors had authorized, I want to say, a 25 or 27% pay raise for the electeds, right? For the elected officials to include themselves. I think Supervisor Kevin Jeffries voted no, but everybody else voted for him. And of course, Sheriff Bianco was quoted saying that he works hard and he deserved a raise. So he got $112,000 raise, I think, immediately. And I, or it could be more, it could be $115,000 raise immediately, as opposed to incremental, over the next 4 or 5 years. So, and that really irritated the line staff, because they're in negotiations now, and their negotiations, from what I understand, I was told, was 3% a year for 3 years. So that 3% is not keeping up with inflation and the cost of living, of course. Wow. So they're a little upset about that they want more. And these deputies, and one thing, you have to understand is, as a department head, you have to understand that your most valuable asset is your employees, not you, not your captain. It's the employee, it's the deputies, it's the corporals, it's the community service officers, it's the correctional deputies, it's the sergeants who have boots on the ground, who are pushing that black and white, who are protecting and serving the community. You need to recognize, and Bianco thinks he's the best thing since sliced bread, quite frankly, that he deserves it. He works hard. Sheriff Bianco works hard at his social media presence. If you look at it, his platform, right? And you look at his press conference, it's all about I, me, and he takes credit for the hard work that men and women do in on the front lines of public safety. So, but I don't believe that they needed a raise, quite frankly. They make good money, but the board approved it, and they were given the raise, and now they got to probably save some money somehow, right? The department's going to have to save some money somehow. Maybe they should stop the purchase of that $13 million plane.
Yeah.
That they applied for, a couple of years ago.
Wow.
But yeah, I'm sure there was some, like in anything with politicians, there's always negotiations going on behind the scene, but at the end of the day, what are you negotiating away to get a 27% raise?
Yeah, that's a really high.
That's the question I would have.
You had mentioned the topic of social media. So something strange happened a few days ago, is that I was banned from Truth Social. I'm still trying to get my account back, and my Twitter account was suspended, which I did end up getting back, although there's been some weirdness with the account where while it's open, it feels like a damaged car. Let me put it that way. What I was told by a whistleblower is that he'll use his powers as sheriff, where he could notify somebody, hey, this guy's under investigation, or this guy's a criminal, or this guy's a terrorist, or whatever, and use that as a way to get people's social media shut down, which is interesting, because one of the places I've been hitting him consistently every single day is on my socials by posting evidence that shows him to be a blatant liar, and really has turned most of the logical public against him. And I say logical public because I recognize some of these trolls you're talking about, but anybody that's not completely biased or, an acolyte of his. I mean, 99% of people are now looking at the evidence that's posted and saying that this guy needs to resign, they need to remove him, that he's a criminal. So tell me, what do you know about what could have happened with the social accounts in terms of Sheriff Bianco, again, misusing his power?
I think the mere allegations that he said in his press conference, he made those statements that now these social media platforms have this, that doesn't align with our values. Well, of course, accusing someone of possibly being an assassin and trying to assassinate, President Trump, that's going to cause them to kick in their censor or their ethics or the integrity of their platform by saying, no, we're not going to have this person on. That's my belief. I don't know directly if he has contacts with these folks, these social media executives, but one can reasonably infer that, hey, you have a Sheriff Bianco, having a press conference stating A, B, C, D, and E. We might not want to be associated with that. Let's suspend their accounts. So yeah, I would say, in my opinion, it's definitely influential, but I don't know directly if he has that contact, because Riverside County is one county in the state of California that has 58 county, and we're not a hotbed for anything, quite frankly. I don't think he would have that type of juice, to have a contact with the executives. Maybe someone in LA would, because they're a big city. LAPD is 10,000 strong. LASD is 10,000 strong. NYPD is like 35 to 38,000 strong. So these larger, agencies, they may have a contact. But I don't think Riverside County Sheriff's Department, with 4,100 both non-sworn and sworn personnel in the department, is big enough to warrant Sheriff Bianco having a direct line to some social media platform executive. But I wouldn't put it past these social media platforms saying that. I mean, look what they did to Trump and his supporters, quite frankly. And you can see the disparaging treatment, but I wouldn't put it past them saying that, okay, Mr. Miller, we're going to suspend your account till we look into this further. Just based on their policies and procedures.
Yeah. And just I want to give a little piece of news because I did get my Twitter X account back. Truth Social is still banned, although I think once they understand what's gone on. I did get word from individuals within the Trump campaign, because just today I released a piece about January 6th and how the Democrats and the leftists were involved in planning that event. It's actually right on my Not Vem Miller Twitter account. And what I heard through inside channels is that pretty much all the way up to Trump, they're very proud of the work that I'm doing. So it seems as though any nonsense that Sheriff Bianco has put out there has gone away. I've heard about this website that Sheriff Bianco apparently was using to attack people that don't necessarily fall in line with his policies. Do you know anything about that website?
What's the website's name? Do you know the website?
I got to look up my.
I know during the election.
Yes, it was during the election, exactly. Yes.
They used, the rightondaily.com.
Right on, exactly.
So basically, they came up with that form, and that gave an opportunity for the employees to express their concerns, their disappointment, their dismay about issues, and which probably led to a lot of fuel to his campaign, because it's very hard to verify those things from a candidate perspective, but it also influenced the vote of other department members, because I remember that everybody was going around, go to the rightondaily.com, go to rightondaily.com. And we all did. We all went to the rightondaily.com. And some of the things in there, I can tell you, a majority of the things in there were factual. Majority of the things were factual, especially when it was related to misconduct. Overtime misconduct, policy violations and this and that. But the problem is, you use that to your benefit, and the current administration at the time didn't have any knowledge of it, because if you don't make your supervisors aware of it, they can't address it. But, if you ask me, because not everybody has X, not everybody is on these social media. If you had a forum such as that, that where people can, log in, and it's strictly confidential. Their email addresses are confidential. Their names are confidential. They don't even have to give their real name, but at least their email address is confidential, or any identifying information is confidential. And they will literally, at this current state of the department, a number of employees would probably get on there and tell you what's really going on. How is this projects management working? How are contracts awarded? How are people being disciplined for this, and another individual who's in the circle, are not being disciplined, and they committed a similar, if not the same, violation of department policy and or statutory law. So that was very helpful to Bianco, the writeondaily.com, and because it started out up north, and it was a Republican kind of, the guy was like a Republican think tank where he talked about politics all the time, and he got 2 million hits, 2 million reviews and comments, if I'm not mistaken, on it, which was his goal when he started the allowing people to comment on the Riverside County Sheriff's Department. Wow. So that might be an easier avenue to obtain information that you're seeking from additional information that you're seeking, because it sounds like a lot of people are calling you. You put your number out there, your 702 number at the board. Yeah. That was, you're standing up for yourself. So that's good. And then people, quite frankly, people see that, hey man, this guy Miller, man, he's not backing down. Oh, no. Bianco seems to think he'll just, whittle away and finally go away. And that's probably why you're getting so many text messages and probably some calls on that 702 number, because you did put it out there. And I remember watching it because I watched the board meeting, and I remember Supervisor Chuck Washington commented, was that number just for us? Meaning the board of supervisors. And he kind of shrugged his shoulder and said, well, it's out there. So.
Yeah. So, no. It's out. I want it out there. I have that number specifically for whistleblowers, and it's the hotline, Mm-hmm. All right. So Samuel Flores and his wife, I've heard they've been put through hell. Mm-hmm. Tell me a little bit more just to complete that story. From what I understand, like they, both him and his wife were targeted, and now they're clearing up their name. But years later, tell me where does that stand, and what's going on with those guys?
Well, Sam Flores was convicted of conspiracy and bribery, and wrongfully convicted, in my opinion. But I respect the jury's decision. They are currently in the process of appeal. During this whole process, right, when Sam, was charged via indictment from the grand jury, the first thing people did was started making these flyers about Sam, him in uniform, thief, jailbird, all this other nonsense, right? They started posting those flyers around the office to where his daughter worked. His daughter also worked for the department, and his daughter, they would harass her, at the office with these, posters and accusing, and I can get I think I have a couple of the posters I can send you, posters accusing him of this nonsense, right? To the point where she would go out and she would eat alone at lunch in her car and cry, and ultimately resigned her position with the sheriff's department after asking but not getting any help, because the county has this policy, a board policy, of a hostile working environment. So when you go to work and your fellow employees, your coworkers are posting these rude and disparaging posters about your father, that's a hostile work environment. That is very unhealthy. And then when you ask for help and you don't receive any help, you quit. So, that was she resigned her position. Now, Sam befriended a tow truck company owner, and they became good friends. They did family events together. Sam never received a free car from him. Never. Everything he got from him were parts, because he's an avid car guy. He likes the 60s and 70s older cars. He purchased everything he got. He purchased, right? But they said that was a conspiracy for him to pad the tow company and for him to keep his contract. Well, there was never a contract in place, right? And this was a systemic, I would say a systemic problem at the Temecula station, to the point where they just, cherry picked who they're going to prosecute. Who Sheriff Bianco is going to prosecute? Who are we going to pick to prosecute? Because I've seen text messages where an individual said, "Hey, you're done paying, your car's done? Your mom's car is done painted. What do I owe you? And it's like, oh, nothing. He goes, when do you go on rotation? I'll tow a bunch of cars for you. That guy wasn't prosecuted. I see things where, hey, my car broke down. Can you pick up? My daughter's broke down. She's over by the high school. Can you go pick her up? And, just drop the car at the house. That guy wasn't prosecuted for bribing and for a tow company. And the tow company in question was DJ's Towing, and the owner of the tow company is, he works in the fire industry. He's like a civilian firefighter. He delivers, heavy equipment to fires to help fight those fires and create fire lines. He's a first responder. So he's not going to tell any other first responder no, but they turn this into some conspiracy to bribery. If you want to say there's a policy violation on a gratuity that no one seems to be able to define what a gratuity is, fine. But a crime, no way. This was all orchestrated by, everything went through Captain McConnell. Captain McConnell, knew about all the activities going on within our station, in my opinion, to the free lunches at Chick-fil-A that, the sergeant and the motors were going to, and all the deputies, to even McConnell utilizing flatbeds for events and getting free tickets to the Balloon and Wine Festival. Well, those free tickets are comp. They're comp to first responders, quite frankly. Each person who works the event, each company that works the event gets X amount of tickets to give away to people and comp. And they said that was a bribe. So in a nutshell, they took what could be a policy violation and they created a contract that didn't exist. There wasn't a signed contract. And they made this thing to where Sam was getting preferential treatment and free lunches from, DJ's Towing to keep their tow contract, which is far from the truth, because they all have receipts to basically say, I paid this time, it's your turn to pay. Oh, I paid last time, so, oh no, you paid last time, so I'm paying this time, right? So this was more than a business relationship in regards to, the sheriff's department and tow company. This was this business relationship had evolved into, a personal friendship to where they're doing things off duty, and now you make it criminal to purchase a lien sale car, right? Which Sam Flores never purchased a lien sale car. And another guy did, but it was from a private party. It was a private party tow. But, I know an individual who is close to Sheriff Bianco who purchased 5 lien sale cars. But do you think he was ever prosecuted? Do you think he was investigated? No, he was not, because there's a saying that, hey, you're not in the circle, You either donate money to the campaign or you're in the circle. I don't know, but there was definitely some cherry picking of the violation. And then and I think the problem, is the district attorney's office turned a blind eye. Deputy DA Allen, Deputy DA Soresi turned a blind eye to the other misconduct that was discovered during this investigation. For example, filing a false insurance claim, possession of stolen property, domestic violence. There is a mandate in law enforcement. If you have information of a domestic violence incident, you have to investigate it. Well, Deputy Nicholas Jones got promoted off this case, and there was evidence in the text messages of domestic violence. But yet he never investigated, nor did he refer it to be investigated to either another agency, San Bernardino, or another station to investigate it. And in fact, the victim of that domestic violence had reached out and asked what's going on with her case and why her case wasn't investigated, the allegations of domestic violence. And unfortunately, I had to say, I don't know, file a complaint with the sheriff's department and the DA's office, because they were aware of it. A simple call to to the sheriff's department in San Bernardino, because they lived in San Bernardino County at the time. A simple call there would have been, hey, I got this allegation of domestic violence that I've discovered as a result of a search warrant. I'm going to write a report, send everything to you for further follow-up to conduct an investigation, so you know what the evidence I have obtained in regards to very credible evidence in regards to domestic violence. So when you ignore all those And those are intentionally ignored because they're very simple to resolve. Hey, I need you to investigate this. End of discussion. Let me know what your results are. Hey, I need you to investigate this aspect of it. But instead, um, they ignored it, and it was excluded from the trial to some degree. But there's a legal mandate that you will investigate domestic violence instances. So I don't know why Sheriff Bianco opted to not have Jones investigate or anybody else investigate it, or ask the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Department to investigate it. And you got to understand, when you're dealing with employees, everything goes through Bianco. He makes the final decision, right? There's this presentation of the investigation, and then there's a decision. Big decision was made when the big decision in this case, I think, was a turning point, is when the department hired an independent investigator, a private investigator. He was retired from the DA's office. He was a bureau chief at the DA's office. His name was Eric Nevins. Eric Nevins did a 187-page report exonerating pretty much Flores of any criminal conduct, but yet stating that there are definitely potential policy violations. So you know what the department did with that report? They hid that report. They removed 52 pages of that report.
Wow.
And then had another individual named Sergeant Lenton write the conclusions of that report, and then put his name on the report and submit the report as of its own. Now, being in law enforcement, we're in law enforcement for a reason, because we're supposed to be really bad crooks. Mm-hmm. The problem with this was Lenton failed to remove the header and the footer of the narrative portions of the report, where it says Eric Nevins Investigations, with his PI license number and his phone number and his office address, right? So that was a couple-year battle on getting that report, and no one knew about that report until a phone call was made. 2 phone calls was made. One anonymous phone call was made to the defense saying, "Hey, that report Lenton wrote, that's not his report." And another call said, another person called confirming that Eric Nevins wrote a report. Now, here's an independent private investigator with 40 years experience in law enforcement. He was the bureau chief of investigations for the Riverside County District Attorney's Office. His reputation is beyond reproach. His investigation is clear. It's fair, it's objective. And they hired him to do that, to conduct a thorough, complete, fair, and objective investigation. And then they altered his report. Wade Lenton, I think Sergeant Lenton, altered his report and submitted it as of its own, because he put his name on it. I'll give him credit to the fact that he said, although the report was written by Eric Nevins, the following conclusions are my conclusions, right? Which are 180 degrees from investigator Nevins's conclusions. So the question asks, why are you hiding things? Why are we hiding things? It's part of the investigation. Give the employees the entire investigation, the good, the bad, the ugly, the favorable, the unfavorable. Let the labor attorneys argue, the criminal attorneys argue. But when you start concealing things and you start hiding things under the irrational belief that, we don't have to give them that, then that violates their due process. That violates their ability to defend themselves, because you already have a predisposed disposition of this investigation and what you're going to do about it. Now you have to get all the people who are involved in the investigation to buy off on it. So after the indictment came down, Nicholas Jones was promoted to investigator. His supervisor, Sergeant Sean Brown, was promoted to lieutenant, and then ultimately captain, right? Well, Sergeant Brown at the time was now Captain Brown. He knows better. He knows that there's allegations of domestic violence. You're supposed to be investigated. He knows that. he knows that you're supposed to tell the truth. You're supposed to your investigation should be fair, factual, and objective, showing not only that evidence of a crime that you're saying committed, but all those mitigating factors, and evidence that exonerates someone, of suspicion. So it's important to identify an individual who commits a crime and have the evidence, but it's of greater importance and critical in the criminal justice system to exonerate someone under suspicion. And Eric Nevins exonerated them of any criminal liability. And this was the DA's saying it. Eric Nevins doesn't say who committed a crime or who we prosecute, who we don't prosecute. Okay. You think Eric Nevins testified in the trial? No. He left. He left, and I can only imagine that because he has contracts, he left to preserve his contracts. And that individual, I know, reportedly told people he left because of Bianco. Bianco can influence his contracts that he has with the other. And shortly after that, he lost his contract with probation.
Wow.
So you have these because there's so much work to be done that you have contractors who have law enforcement experience who conduct your background investigations, your internal investigations, to alleviate the workload of your staff. So.
Wow. So, to kind of wrap it up, is there anything we haven't talked about that is worth mentioning? Any, bullet points about his, wrongdoings, or anything you think it's important to mention before we close up this interview?
No, sir. I would just reiterate the fact that there is a history, there is a pattern of behavior of Sheriff Bianco accusing other elected officials, just like he accused you. Without any evidence, and that just shows a pattern of behavior. You can look on his comments on how he treats our elected officials, both here in Riverside County and our state officials in Sacramento, and even our federal representative. They were elected by the people. Show some respect to them. Don't be rude and disrespectful and unprofessional. Oh, and I don't know if you know this, but the one thing I like to comment on is after the conviction of President Trump in New York, he went on his Instagram in full uniform and said, he's going, it's about time. I don't know if you saw that, but it's about time we put a felon in the White House. And he was in uniform. Well, the government code says there's no politicking. You can't politics. And it's government code 300. I don't know if it's 306 or 304. It's government code 3300. Is the California Peace Officers Bill of Rights. And it expressly says that, you don't politics, you don't do politics, endorsements in uniform. Apparently it doesn't apply to elected officials, and that's fine.
Could I mention one thing about that, though? We actually submitted a complaint to 2 places. One of them already rejected it, even though we're very well aware that what he did was wrong. And so somebody's running cover there, or they don't understand the laws, but they actually, out of these 2 places that we submitted a complaint, one of them already rejected it. So they don't seem to be doing their job correctly.
Right. They say it's not applying to elected officials. But what does that say as a leader to your staff? If it's not appropriate and lawful for them to do it in uniform, then you shouldn't be doing it. Although you're an elected official and you might have that exemption, that's fine. Here's another story. There was a chief that questioned that conduct, and that chief was fired. No, he was an assistant sheriff. The assistant sheriff just questioned that conduct. In my understanding, the assistant sheriff questioned the fact, what do we tell our troops, when we tell them that they can't do a political endorsement in uniform and we're doing political endorsements in uniform. That chief was fired. And this is the vindictive part of it. This is what I think is important. And because I've been out retired for 4 years and I was disgusted by this. If you want to at-will an employee, that's well within your discretion. That go ahead, at-will employee, he disagrees, that's fine. But when you take in that employee's assignment history log and you start disseminating it around where it says termination, that's unacceptable, that's unprofessional, that's unethical. And that floated around to so many people. It eventually made its way to me. And I said, this is not right. And then he goes on when asked by the media, that, oh, you're just looking to start something. He left and there was nothing nefarious about it. There's an article on that. Well, he left of his own. He retired. Well, he didn't retire. You terminated him, and there's his assignment log that you had disseminate to further sully this wonderful peace officer. And this, I know the guy for many years. He is, the epitome of integrity, and that's why he spoke up. And then you at will him, and then you're telling people he resigned, and then you're floating around. So the assignment history log is when you were hired and all the assignments you were at. And his last assignment, it's a termination. That's where he was very vindictive toward this individual, which is, unacceptable. And the department, rightfully, I received a flood of phone calls from both active employees and retired members of the department saying this is just wrong. And what do you tell them? You can't, he has surrendered his integrity for his political personal gain.
Yeah. I mean, his days of politics are over, though. Unfortunately, because he's now looks like a complete idiot on the national stage, all the way up to, I mean, the fact that he picked on somebody that actually has worked directly with core members of the Trump team was just like, it's obvious that he was trying to, with what he did in this police uniform while on duty, trying to say that it's time we put a felon in the White House in terms of our former president. And then this thing of like, oh, I just saved the former president from the third assassination attempt. It's obvious that he's kissing up to the president. And out of 50,000 individuals that he could have done this to on that day, he chose the one that probably maybe there's 50 people at that rally, 100 people that have the connections I would have to that campaign. And bad idea. But let me ask you this. What is, you seem to understand the law very well. You seem very competent. In fact, if you're running for sheriff in my county, you'd have my vote. What do you think is the right thing to happen at this point? What should happen that is lawful, that is by the book, that is the sort of thing that would happen to an individual like a Sheriff Bianco that is doing the kinds of things that, he's been doing?
The only thing that's going to happen is you need to vote him out of office. I don't think there's going to be any conduct. He's going to either have to be pressured to resign or get elected to the governor, which I highly doubt, or get voted out of office. Those are the three things that are going to happen. I know his undersheriff was saying that, Undersheriff Don Sharp was reportedly saying that, when Bianco gets elected to governor, that he was going to be appointed to sheriff. So we'll see how that rolls, because I don't think that is a long shot here. And this California is definitely a deep blue state on the political spectrum, And I think regardless whether you're a Democrat or a Republican, I don't think you want partisan law enforcement. That equals. Let me turn my light on, because it's getting dark here. Hold on, sorry.
No worries.
Yeah, you don't want partisan politics. You don't just serve the GOP. You serve everybody. It's service above self, but it seems that And by the way, the service above self is a great concept, but not when you take it from the Air Force Academy. It has, one of their many mottos is service before self. So you just change one word, and all of a sudden people think you're a genius.
Yeah.
But it's a great concept if you live by it and you work by it. But if you look at the sheriff's conduct, is that befitting of a law enforcement professional? Right.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of disheartening that the only way to really get him out of there, because what you're talking about is crimes committed under the color of law over and over again. In fact, a friend of mine who's a constitutional lawyer showed me a law that says that if you're reporting false information to the feds, which obviously he was, and trying to accuse me of being a third assassin, that's an actual felony. But are those kind of laws that are just never used? I mean, it seems like there'd be a lot of laws in the books that would, state that what he's doing is, crimes under the color of law. Why isn't there other avenues through the courts, through higher law enforcement to hold them accountable?
Well, those violations, as you described, would be like investigations conducted by the FBI mainly. And if you look at it, there's a lot of speculation right now that Sheriff Bianco, who's like the quote unquote, everyone says is the greatest sheriff in America. Well, they said the same thing about Lee Baca, They said the same thing about Mike Corona in Orange County, and they did federal time. They say the same thing about Joe Arparo in Maricopa County in Arizona, and look what happened to him as well. So, no, I mean, that's when you violate the law, eventually that the truth is going to bubble to the top and you're going to be exposed.
Yeah.
The question is, I think there's a lot of concern, at least the people I spoke to in the management ranks, there's a lot of concern with the Attorney General's investigation. Bianco's already, he already, as soon as they launched that investigation, basically was telling everybody, go ahead, you're wasting your time and resources. It's a nothing, right? When what he should be saying, and when you start disparaging the DOJ investigators, the Attorney General's office, you got something to hide. And I'm sure they hid some things from the Attorney General's office, some items, where they keep things, because that's what they do. They go through all the reports, the videos, the processes, and then they make a determination that there, if or not there is a systemic violations or an intentional violations through conduct and practice and policy, violating the constitutional rights of individuals in Riverside County and those in custody, So it's going to be interesting when someone yells at the rooftop, there's nothing there,
Yeah. He did the same
there's
thing.
always something there. Yeah.
Yeah, he did the same thing. He sent messages to other friends of mine that the crazy thing is 3 days before, we were both guests at the James O'Keefe premiere for his movie in Newport, and we're literally a few feet apart. I never met him during that occasion, but the point being that we have a lot of mutual friends, and he sent these messages that are like, oh, he has nothing. And I mean, like, literally, I don't think I've talked to a lawyer yet that's not like, you have one of the most rock solid cases. Because once I tell him that I got a 12-hour recording and this is what the recording says, which completely contradicts his international statements, and then they asked me about the body cam. And at this point, obviously I have credibility because I went on video the day I found out about this, on the 13th, within an hour of being called this assassin on an international level. I put a video together with a very distinct timeline that's date stamped, right? And then the entire mainstream media saw that. So basically what people realize is, wait a minute, everything he says is true. Everything Bianco said is a lie. And that's why, friends of mine that have been approaching him and, essentially kind of getting a feeler for him, they're hearing back that, oh, he's got nothing. He's just going to waste his money. It's going to go nowhere. Same kind of stuff that you're talking about. And I'm like, dude, like, I don't know. I guess there's people that kind of tactic works on. For me, it's more like, if you want to run the marathon with me, let's run it. You know what I mean? And you're going to lose at the end. That's why I worry about my safety, because really, I think he realizes the monolithic nature and the fact that I have probably one of the most solid cases that'll ever hit the courts. I think he's going to realize that, I mean, he's in trouble on a personal level, on a professional level, unless, the feds before that, charge him for something. But it's, it's not looking good, I think,
Well, one thing I want people to focus on is Chad Bianco, Sheriff Bianco, is saying you should see the way he acted. You should look at his behavior, meaning you, Mr. Miller, right?
Yeah.
Don't look at, the public has a right to act the way they act, right? But the professionalism and the responsibility to enforce the law fair and objectively and be with integrity and honesty is incumbent upon the law enforcement professional, the deputy sheriff, the sheriff of Riverside County. Look at his conduct. When he starts accusing you of being this uncooperative individual, right? Like he did me, and I'll get to that. He's trying to cast blame on you to justify his conduct, right? So when I retire,
I got some bad news. I got some bad news for him right there too, because again, this is before he knew I recorded the entire thing. I was a Boy Scout the entire time, a Boy Scout, and I'm dying for those body cams to come out, because it's going to show what a blatant liar he is. I was a Boy Scout. I couldn't have been nicer. Like I arrived at the event. It's not like they searched my car. I arrived at the event, 20 yards from the parking lot and the entrance of the parking lot. And I just called a cop over. The cop, this is all recorded. People could listen to it right on Not Vem Miller on my Twitter account or my X account. The cop comes over. I say very nicely, because my biggest concern there was that I never thought like this is going to end up this calamity. I thought the worst case scenario is he's going to tell me to do a U-turn because of the heightened security and tell me to go home. And then I have to drive home without going to the Trump rally and seeing all my friends who I was planning on meeting there, some of whom I was on phone calls on the way there, by the way. So it's like all of them could vouch that we were all excited. We're all going to hang out. We're going to see this Trump rally. We're going to have a little bonfire at the end of the night, around a bunch of RVs, and it was just going to be a good old time. But so my biggest concern was this guy's going to make me do a U-turn. And in a very nice way, I said, hey, I got a couple of firearms. I'm from Nevada. I'm with the Republican Party. And really my goal was to make him feel comfortable, because I understood there's a heightened state of, security. Right. I understood that like he could make me make a U-turn and go home. I didn't expect all this kind of stuff to happen, but it's very obvious that this police department has been so rogue. It's like when a kid steals a jelly bean and then eventually works his way up to robbing houses. It's like it's very obvious that now we're on the latter end of that criminal spectrum, where he's gotten away with so much that he thinks he could actually bend the truth, and he has the power to conceal things and have his way, not thinking that maybe somebody outsmarted him this time by recording the whole thing.
Yeah. And he's trying to. You're absolutely correct. Thank goodness you did record it, because then it would have been like just his word going out in the public purview. I will give you an example why he's going to focus on your conduct, right? He's going to try to say your conduct was so egregious. I was being interviewed by an editorial board. We were being interviewed by an editorial board, and they talked about me being on admin leave, right? Me being placed on admin leave the last 2 weeks of my career, which is well within his discretion, right? Bianco said I abruptly retired because I didn't want to cooperate with the investigation. Well, first of all, I don't know about any investigation to this day on why he put me on admin leave, right? Secondly, I have a constitutional right not to cooperate with law enforcement. I have a 5th and 6th Amendment privilege, So for you to tell me that I retired so I don't have to cooperate with an investigation was absolutely false. In fact, if there was an investigation, you should have sent your investigators over to my house and we could have talked, and they could have asked for an interview, and I would have politely said, no, I invoke my constitutional rights. And I think everybody in the community, if you feel the need to protect yourself, invoke your constitutional rights. Make the law enforcement agency do a fair and objective investigation and make them work for it. Always, because no one's going to protect your rights better than you are. So protect your rights by invoking your rights. And that's perfectly all right. That's the system we have, and you have to respect that system, right? So that's just another example where he says, listen, you have something to hide because you retired. No, I planned on retiring, at the end of 2020. And for you to say that this was some type of last minute decision, I had to break out a memo that I wrote several months earlier saying I planned on retiring. And to further prove that, how dishonest Bianco is, so he's going to try to flip the switch to where he's already trying to continue to sully your reputation by saying you shouldn't see his conduct. Well, his conduct, meaning you, Mr. Miller, your conduct had no way anything to do with him to make such outrageous statements about a third assassination attempt, especially when you don't have any evidence to prove it. You can't hide behind your badge and say it's common sense and reality. Well, are you going to be arrested for common sense and reality, Mr. Miller? Is he going to try to get a Ramey warrant for you now, based on his common sense and reality and lack of evidence? What's reasonable? It's evidence. Direct evidence, indirect evidence, circumstantial evidence. Nowhere is there common sense and reality. It's physical evidence. It's evidence to prove that there was a crime and that you committed a crime is the standard. And I don't believe he has that based on what you're saying and based on what he's saying.
I mean, I don't want to sound too confident, but look, I've worked on a lot of cases. I've worked with FBI, and just by virtue of doing investigative journalism and documentary work and reality shows and, mystery documentaries and police documentaries, and just you meet a lot of people people, you talk to a lot of people. And I mean, this case, I mean, there's no such thing as 100% case, but is there like a 99.99999%? Like, it's just, I know my behavior was, I was a Boy Scout. It was responsible for me to let this person know before I went in the parking lot that, hey, I got a couple of firearms. I'm from Nevada. I'm with the Republican Party, really expecting him to say, you know, go home at worst case scenario. I mean, I did every responsible step. I was polite to the cops. I put up.
You're being transparent. You can't get any more transparent.